Welcome to another episode of Curator's Chronicles, where history takes flight and stories soar. I'm your host and curator, Christian Gerling, and today we have the distinct privilege of hosting retired Navy Captain Russ Bartlett. Captain Bartlett served as the commanding officer and flight leader of the Blue Angels from 2002 to 2004, a role that placed him at the helm of one of the world's most renowned flight demonstration teams. Many of you may also recognize him from the 2004 Discovery documentary miniseries titled Blue Angels: A Year in the Life, where he offered viewers a rare glimpse into the life and challenges of these elite aviators. In this episode, Captain Bartlett will take us through his extraordinary journey as a Blue Angel, sharing the rigorous selection process, the immense discipline required, and the behind-the-scenes realities that most never see. From the highs of precision flying to the challenges of leadership, he'll provide an insider's perspective on what it truly takes to earn the coveted blue flight suit. So, fasten your seatbelts and get ready for an exciting ride as we delve into the life and legacy of a Blue Angel. Thanks for joining us, Captain.
Yeah, my pleasure, Christian. Good to be here.
So, tell me, where did the desire to fly come from?
Well, to be honest, I grew up on Nantucket Island off the coast of Massachusetts, and when I was 11 years old, I bought a Honda XR75, little dirt bike, and I don't know, it was just one of those things that I bonded with, and it became my thing. I spent my life on that little motorcycle, and I had a little 13-foot Boston Whale, a little boat that I'd go out in the summer, and that just was kind of what made me happy. And so when it was time to look at colleges and things, my mom encouraged me to look at the Navy, and we figured that flying airplanes in the Navy was the closest thing an adult could do to riding a dirt bike, and that's a pretty good way to make a living. So That was the path I chose.
Was there a reason why there was an interest in the Navy versus the Air Force, say?
Well, first of all, Air Force is the Air Force, so that's a conversation for another time. I'm not going to go there. My grandfather, uncle, dad, and other uncle were all Army. So my entire two generations were Army. And I jumped ship and went to the Navy, I guess primarily because we lived on the water, and that was what I knew and liked, and so that's kind of why I went that way. And so my little brother went to the Naval Academy. I married my roommate's sister from the Naval Academy. We've been married for 35 years. My sister married a guy from my first fleet squadron in the Navy. So we were entirely Navy, my whole generation. And then my daughter went off the reservation and married an Air Force guy. He's a B-2 pilot, and they live out at Whiteman Air Force Base out in Missouri, which is actually pretty cool. The B-2 is pretty awesome.
Oh, that is pretty awesome. Yeah, so, okay, well, yeah, joining the Navy then was definitely a no-brainer then. So, so you end up attending the Naval Academy. Tell us what that experience was like, and how did this change you as a person?
Well, it was unlike anything that I'd ever experienced before. I mean, you go in there for plebe summer, and it's like boot camp, right? You spend that first 6 or 7 weeks of the summer learning military fundamentals. I mean, you get your head shaved. It's physical training in the morning, it's physical training in the evening, and it's professional military training all day long, all that kind of nonsense. And then jump right into the academic year. And so that whole first year, you're a new guy, you're a trainee. And so it's pretty rough, but the folks that you do it with, you share something unusual and exceptional. And so a bunch of those folks from my time at the Naval Academy are still friends to this day. Yeah. Some 40 years later, we have a chat group called the Idiot Thread, and that thing explodes about every other day when there's a topic du jour that we all have to weigh in on. So it's a lot of fun, a life changer. I'm so glad I had that opportunity.
What sort of academics do they cover?
Well, it's primarily an engineering school, so okay. 80% of the graduates have some sort of an engineering degree. I was an aerospace engineering major. Okay. But, there's a small percentage that also do political science, management, econ, things like that. But the whole idea is basically they're training engineers who can go out into the fleet Navy to drive ships or submarines or fly airplanes or design those things and understand from their engineering background, the fundamentals of how it works. So they really emphasize heavily the engineering side. And even if you're an econ major or management major, you still have to take a pretty heavy engineering load, kind of as a minor, which doesn't seem so minor to those guys. So everybody comes out of there with a pretty solid engineering pedigree.
Oh, that's a good primer on the Naval Academy for people who may not know that.
Yeah.
So eventually you wind up down in Pensacola at the Navy's flight school. Talk us through what this was like, and so how long does flight school typically last?
So I guess from the time you start aviation pre-flight indoctrination, that's just academics.
Okay.
It's the fundamentals of how airplanes work and, basic aerodynamics and all that kind of stuff. And that, that's a month, I think, of academic training. You do obstacle course, physical fitness training. They throw you in the pool and do water survival, and then you start flying. In my case, the T-34 Turbo Mentor Beechcraft product. Today, the T-6 Texan, also a Beechcraft product. And by the way, I built T-6 Texans at Beechcraft when I got out of the Navy for 8 years.
Huh.
So anyway, you do that for about 6 months, and at the end of that, it's a propeller-driven turboprop. At the end of that, you select either jets, propellers, or helicopters. So you can either go jet pipeline or multi-engine propellers like formerly the P3, or the E2 Hawkeye, those kind of things, or helicopters. So I picked jets and went down to Beeville, Texas, and did advanced jet training in the TA-4J Skyhawk. Now it's the T-45 Goshawk. But you do that jet training, you go to the aircraft carrier for the first time, and then you get your wings and you select your pipeline and you go out into the fleet to fly some certain airplane. So it takes about probably 2 years to get through flight school. It's a huge commitment.
Wow. Yeah, it certainly is. Yeah, the amount of time. So after flight school and some more advanced training, what airplane did you ultimately end up flying?
Well, my first tour in the Navy, I got drafted to go fly the S-3 Viking, which was not my first choice. It was a 4-seat, twin-engine, jet-powered, carrier-based airplane that was designed to go hunt, chase, and prosecute Soviet submarines. So that was our mission off the carrier battle group. And, that was in the mid-'80s. So the Cold War was the thing. And that's what we would do is we'd go out from the carrier. A normal cycle on the aircraft carrier between launch and recovery is about an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes. We'd go out in triple cycles. So we'd be out flying for 6.5 hours from the ship and going out and doing, submarine prosecution. So great mission, important mission, not the airplane I wanted to fly, but some of my best friends in the world are from that first tour, flying that airplane from the ship. I was fortunate enough, did well in the airplane, and got to switch to the Hornet. Went to the Hornet Training Squadron for 6 months after that first fleet tour in the S-3, and went right back to my same ship and my same air wing in a different squadron. So that just blew people's minds because they knew me from before when I was flying the S-3, and now I was back flying the Hornet. And they were like, something's different. Did you shave your mustache or something? Or different patches on? What's going on? So anyway, I was really lucky to be able to make that switch. And then I spent the next 18 years flying the Hornet.
So I imagine there's probably not a lot of people who start out in an airplane and ended up switching to other airplanes, or would that be a common thing in the Navy?
No, it's pretty unheard of unless your airplane is being phased out. Like, when the A7 went away, some of those guys went to the A6 or the Hornet or whatever. When the Tomcat went away, those people came to the Hornet community, that kind of thing. But if your community's not going away and you have no good excuse for going to another airplane, the Navy, it's just almost unheard of. So, the planets aligned for me. And, I had the support of my S-3 squadron commander, who, his words that I will never forget that he wrote in my transition endorsement. He said, although it'll be a big loss to the S-3 community, it's in the best interest of the United States Navy and a very deserving young junior officer to allow Lieutenant Bartlett to switch airplanes to the Hornet. And I think if my squadron commander would be willing to say that, that says a lot. And I think that was a big part of why they decided to roll the bones on me and give me a chance to go fly the Hornet.
Yeah. So you said the S-3 wasn't your first choice. What was your first choice?
The Hornet.
The Hornet? Yeah. Well, there you go.
Yeah. I mean, come on, it's dead sexy.
So those first airplanes, like the S3 you mentioned, so who is that decided by?
Well, it's decided by the needs of the Navy,
Okay.
and there's always an asterisk. You get to pick your top 5 choices or whatever, however many, and if it's available, and you have the grades for it, then you get to go do it. But sometimes there's classes where everybody gets drafted to go fly helicopters because 60% of the pilots in the Navy, believe it or not, fly rotary wing aircraft.
Sure.
Because we have helicopters everywhere, on every ship, everywhere. And so it's a huge part of what we do. And then sometimes, you get a bunch of, a well-distributed mix of jets, props, and helicopters. So you just never know until it's your time, until it's your week to select.
Because that seems such a huge leap from the S3 to the F-18.
Yeah, I mean, you go from an airplane. Well, there's only one pilot in the S3, and there's 2 naval flight officers, and there's 1 enlisted sensor operator. So you're still the only pilot in there, but you still got a guy in the right seat, to say, hey, you're doing great, Russ. Like when it's a dark and stormy night and you got to come back to the boat, someone there to say, hey, nice job, we're good, we got this, that kind of thing. I remember the first time I was out solo in the Hornet, and I had to penetrate a little thunderstorm on the way back into the field. And it's just pouring down, beating on the canopy, which is 6 inches away from my head. And I'm looking around, and I was like, where's my guy saying, you're doing good, Russ, you got this. I was all by myself. And I was like, oh, that's right. That's what I asked for, and this is awesome.
Yeah. So let's go back a little bit. When you first went out to the carrier, can you talk about your first carrier landing and what that was like?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I misspoke before. In my time, we had 2 jets in advanced training. It was the T-2 Buckeye,
Okay.
and then you went to the A-4 Skyhawk. Now it's all done in the T-45. But anyway, we actually went to the ship in the T-2 Buckeye during the day. And I think you go out and you get 4, you do 2 touch and goes and 4 carrier arrested landings. And that was the first time you land on the ship. And so, you had practiced ashore, you had done field carrier landing practices for weeks, and the landing signal officers, the coaches, watched you very carefully and worked with you closely to make sure that you were ready to go. Mm-hmm. And so an instructor pilot would usually take 2 or 3 students, and they would lead you out to the boat, and you set up overhead in the Marshall stack, and then he'd bring you down and bring everybody into the break, and there you go. Now you're on your own, all by yourself, alone and unafraid. And so, you're nervous but you're busy. And so, I really don't remember too much about it. I guess it was like being in a car wreck. You just, hey, I'm stopped on the boat. Must have been a good ride. I guess I did all right because I'm here. And it was just busy. I just remember my last catapult shot after the 4 traps, and they, sent me back to Jacksonville, back to the beach. And it's like, holy cow, I just did that. I wonder what happened and how it went and how my grades are and all that. Because, you're just busy and your hair on fire, just trying to figure it out, not screw the pooch. So, yeah.
Do you remember your first night landing?
Oh, that I do remember. Yeah, because that was the Hornet. So, when you go to the A4 for advanced jet training, you also go back to the boat. And I think we did, 6 day traps or 10, I can't remember what it was, but you don't do any night work. So my first night landings were in the Hornet. And so, I remember that because, again, you practiced and practiced and practiced in the simulator and at the field and, over and over and over. So, again, you go out there and, you marshal overhead the ship and you push and you level off at 1,200 feet at about 10 miles and you drive in at 1,200 feet. You dirty up at 8 miles, put the gear and flaps down, hook down, and at about 3 miles, you start your descent. It's a 3-degree glide slope. And, from 3 miles, you see the ship. If it's a beautiful, clear night, you can see a speck of light, but that's it. And it's really not till a mile that you really can make out what you're looking at. You can see kind of the outline of the flight deck, and it's at about 3/4 of a mile. You call the ball, and you say 4-1, Hornet ball, 4-0, and then the LSOs, the coaches, they got you, and they're keeping you safe. And, then you're just transitioning to a visual scan, and it's a visual scan all the way to touchdown. And so, Yeah, it was terrifying because it's freaking dark, And so, yeah, it was pretty scary. But I mean, after, I was going to say after a few years, it became less terrifying, and that's somewhat true. But it was just a part of it, because whenever we'd go to fight, we'd always do it at night, because we owned the night. We were on night vision goggles, and we had a huge advantage there. So, that was just part of it, was landing on the boat at night. That's just the way it is. That's where the bed is, and that's where the food is. So you got to go back.
So it's still terrifying over the years. It's just less terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I got 841 carrier-arrested landings in my career and 333 of them at night. And so there's not a naval aviator on this planet who doesn't know exactly how many traps he has, carrier-arrested landings, and how many he did at night, because you never forget those.
Yeah, no, you wouldn't. Yeah. No, yeah.
But the day stuff just became fun, because it's fun and you can see everything. So that's very refreshing compared to at night.
Yeah. So after you make the successful move to the F-18, you wind up in Desert Storm. So what sort of missions did you fly, and what was it like flying the F-18 in a combat role?
Well, the lucky thing for me, since I had a non-standard career path, because I went through the S3 for 3 years, and then I went transitioned to the Hornet and went straight back to the fleet. So I had to do back-to-back sea tours. Most of my colleagues who went straight to the Hornet, or anybody who went straight to the Hornet, for example, would go do that for 3 years and then roll into, come back to shore duty as an instructor pilot or go to Top Gun or something like that. So since I was out of sequence, I got to go to Desert Storm when most of my colleagues, my peers, my year group were all on shore duty. Mm-hmm. So that was the great equalizer for me. And it was very fortunate because on my very first tour, 6 months after I started flying the Hornet, I was in the Gulf, on the USS Theodore Roosevelt, flying strikes over Iraq. So our typical route would be, into Iraq. We'd come off the ship. We'd go overhead to the Air Force tanker because they, the Air Force had KC-135s over the ship or over Saudi Arabia for us, and it was free gas. All you needed, all you wanted. And we'd go up and we'd top off, in northern Saudi Arabia, and then we'd cross the border into Iraq. And usually we'd have 6 1,000-pound general-purpose bombs, 6 Mark 83s. We'd have a forward-looking infrared pod at night where we could find targets from, 30 miles or so, and then we'd roll into a visual delivery, generally into a 45-degree dive for the final delivery of the ordnance, because they were dumb bombs at that time.
Okay.
And that was our standard profile, is to drill in there at 34,000 feet, way up high, so you'd stay out of range of most of the, certainly all the AAA was only effective up to about 15,000 feet. And a lot of the surface-to-air missiles, they wouldn't lock us up because they knew that if they did, they were going to eat a missile or, anti-radiation missile, or someone was going to strike that site and they were going to die. So, after about a week, the Iraqis stopped targeting us, and they pretty much stopped launching fighters at us because they knew that if they did, it wasn't going to go well for them. So, after a week, it was just like kind of flying over Florida. We were in the North Arabian Gulf. Our sorties were 2 hours long. We'd fly 2 of them a day. You brief, fly, debrief, eat, brief, fly, debrief, sleep. And we did that every day, for, how long was it, 8, 10 weeks?
Those first missions must have been rather nerve-wracking.
Yeah, my first mission was a day mission, which is strike one. That's stupid. But, that we had work to do. We needed to go during the day. And it was a spare. So a spare means you're in a jet on the flight deck. You're loaded up. You're fired up. You got ordnance on board. And you're there in case somebody else in the strike package goes down. Mm-hmm. So the Hornet rarely breaks. So, even though you've briefed and you're ready to go, there's a little bit of a mental thing where I know I'm just doing this. I'm going to go back downstairs in a few minutes. But no kidding. One of our sister squadron guys was on the catapult. Jet went down, and they spun him off the cat. And the yellow shirt comes sprinting over to my airplane and gives me a thumbs up, going, "Are you up?" And I'm just like, holy cow. I'm like, "Yeah, I'm up." And I'm like, oh, my goodness. Oh, boy, I'm going. And I was a little bit shocked because I didn't really think I was going on this day. And there we go. Off we go. 4-plane strike, into southern Iraq. So we were all a little bit concerned because while we were transiting across the Atlantic, there wasn't too much flying because we had to go fast and get there. So we had a lot of intel briefs, and the intel officers all told us to expect 30% attrition in the first, 20 days because the Soviet IADs that the Iraqis had bought were very good, very effective, and very well integrated. It's going to be ugly. So, we all wrote letters and gave them to our roommates and give this to my wife, if I don't come back and all that stuff. So, so it was a little bit scary to be doing it during the daytime on my first strike. But, over time, of course, you just get used to it. You know the terrain, you know where you are, you know how it works. And so it was a fabulous experience to get immersed in tactical application of the Hornet in my first tour.
Wow, that's amazing. So you end up, after this, you wind up being stationed in Japan for 2 years and then came back and attended the Naval War College there in Rhode Island. What did you study and how did going there change your outlook on, kind of quote, the way of the world?
Well, so after I left the Hornet Squadron, I went to the Hornet Training Squadron as a Hornet instructor pilot.
Okay.
And so that was at Jacksonville, NES at Naval Air Station Cecil Field.
Okay.
And the next tour was called a department head tour. So it's kind of, you're the middle management as lieutenant commander / major, and that's a very important tour for your career. You get to be the OPSO or the maintenance officer. And this is really where you prove, your ability to fly the airplane tactically and well, and also manage and lead a very big and very important department in a squadron. So I volunteered to go to Japan because Japan is the only place in the United States Navy where the entire air wing is forward deployed and they live together on the base at that time at Naval Air Facility at Atsugi, Japan, just outside of Tokyo. Because in the States, when you come back from the ship, everybody disperses to where their community's airplanes are from, right? And so you would never work with the Prowler guys or the Growler guys because they were in Whidbey Island and we were in Jacksonville, Florida, unless you're on the ship. So I thought that was a really neat way to learn how the Navy works as an air wing, as a battle group, by going to Japan. So I volunteered to go over there, and it was fabulous. You're forward deployed on the ship where, all the squadrons live together on the base. All the moms and dads go to the ship at the same time, so the kids, they were all in the same boat, so to speak. They understood the whole thing, and the environment there was so healthy. It was well-funded, and it was just fabulous, so we loved it. Came back, went to the War College, studied national security and strategic studies, and it's the only time in the Navy ever where you're a student, well, except flight school. But, I was a student for a year, and my job was to think big thoughts and study and read things and talk to, professors with giant brains and think about things that you wouldn't take the time to think about otherwise. Mm-hmm. So, that was a really neat experience.
Wow. So now let's talk about the Blue Angels. For those of us on the outside of that world, how does one become a Blue Angel? What's involved, and is it an intimidating process to get to be a Blue Angel?
Well, the Blues are very fortunate, and they get to pick their own replacement.
Okay.
And, you might think that the team just goes out and recruits the best pilots, in air quotes. That is absolutely not the case. Because we would like to say that we can take an average to above average naval aviator and teach him or her how to fly the flight demonstration. It's not that hard. It's just repetition and learning how it works. But what we can't teach is how to make somebody a good person, someone that you want to share a rent-a-car with 300 days a year when you're on the road. Or somebody you can count on to be a good representative of the Navy and the Marine Corps at the crowd line after a really tough flight, for example. Uh-huh. So that's that whole character and commitment thing that we're trying to figure out to get the right people on the team that can gel in that environment, that can take a beating and a debrief every single day and, finish it up with, I'll fix my safeties, glad to be here, and legitimately mean I'm glad to be here, even though I just got the crap beat out of me in a debrief because I'm not good at this. because it's hard and it's different. It's not like anything you've ever done before. But the philosophy and the discipline and the whole work environment is so exceptional. It's unlike any other military organization I've ever been in before. And some of the things I learned there, literally, sounds cliche, but changed me forever. So it was awesome. So for the wingmen and the support officers, they all rush the team like a fraternity or a sorority, whatever. Okay. They come out on the road during the show season, and they would need to spend, 2 or 3, we recommend 2 or 3 weekends with the team, getting to know the folks. And certainly they will know other team members because they're peers, right? And so they're just trying to understand how it works, a little bit about, what goes into making the air show happen. How do you take this circus on the road to a different city every weekend, 35 weekends a year, and make it work safely and successfully. So that's how they apply to rush the team.
So did you ever think of yourself as a Blue Angel? Is this something that you wanted, or is this something somebody recommended to you along the line?
Yeah, never thought of it, Christian, because it never really fit in my, abnormal career pattern, because of doing the S3 thing and being a little bit out of sequence. And, the boss selection, for the commanding officer and flight leader flying the number 1 jet, being the skipper, that's a completely different selection process. It's not the same job as the wingman. Those guys fly formation and do flying things. The boss job is something completely different because you fly profiles and you're providing a stable platform for them to fly formation on. And your job is to fly it consistently, precisely, and predictably day after day in a different city every weekend. And that is really hard. And, oh, by the way, you're also the commanding officer or CEO of the Blue Angels Enterprise. So a whole different selection process done through the Pentagon and all that different. But no, I had never considered it. And I was in Japan the second time as a squadron commander, and my air wing commander was Captain Blood Driscoll. He was the boss in 98 and 99, the commanding officer and flight leader. Mm-hmm. And I didn't think I had the time or, the whatever. It never occurred to me. And he goes, Russ, just put in the package and see what happens. All they can do is say no. And who knows? Right. Maybe you get the job. So just do it. So I was like, okay, geez, all right, fine. So I filled out the package, and I got some really good endorsements from a diverse bunch of admirals and generals that I've worked with in the past, and I tried my best to put together a really compelling package. And then what they do is they invite the 6 finalists to Corpus Christi to the Chief of Naval Aviation Training headquarters, and there's a board chaired by the Chief of Naval Aviation Training called Sinatra. He has a bunch of ex-Blue Angels, a couple of ex-bosses, and all that. And the 6 finalists, have a variety of different venues, to be assessed by this board. And I told my wife when I was leaving Japan, of anybody in the United States Navy, there's 2 people I hope are not finalists with me because they're the right people for this job. And both of them were finalists with me.
Of course. I was
just like, oh no, how could this be? But you never know what goes on behind closed doors. I felt good about my interview, and it was one of those times where I walked out of the room and said, well, we'll see what happens, but I don't know how that could have gone any better. And wouldn't you know it? At the end of the 2.5-day process, we all convene with the board and the 6 finalists, and the admiral in charge of the board, Pappy Boyington, he said, well, welcome all you guys. Thanks for what you've done for naval aviation. You've all done great things for our country. We've made our selection, and he's making uncomfortable eye contact with me 2 or 3 times as he looked around the room. And I'm like, either I'm the guy or I'm a clown, and I have no business being in this room. And I had no idea which one it was. And he goes, we made our selection. Next Blue Angels boss is Commander Russ Bartlett. He goes, Beef, come with me. Call your wife in Japan. Call the team. They're waiting for you in the ready room. And meet me down in the lobby in 15 minutes. KRIS TV, Channel 3 is down there for your first interview. Hustle. Wow. And I was like, roger that, boss. And so that was that.
Wow. Jeez. So extreme nervousness, but excitement mixed with excitement too.
Yeah, absolutely. And at that point, what can you do? You're here competing for this job, and it's a 1 in a million. It's a long shot, and all you can do is put your best foot forward, and answer the questions honestly and with enthusiasm, and that's it. So
what percentage of do you have any idea? So what percentage of naval aviators might say apply to the Blue Angels, and then how many what percentage would actually end up on the team?
Yeah, Christian, I couldn't quote. I don't really know, but they pick 2 pilots every year. So of the 6-plane Delta formation that the team is famous for, 50% of those pilots are new every year.
Oh, okay.
So you've got 50% turnover every year.
Sure.
One of them, the narrator, number 7, would fleet up and generally be either 6 or 3 and fly in the Delta his second year. So that person is new in the Delta, but he's not new on the team. So, but anyway, 2 new pilots get picked every year.
Okay.
So two pilots out of the United States Navy every year. That's a pretty small number.
Right. Yeah. Right. Absolutely. So how much prep work is there before you even step foot in an F-18 Blue Angel? I mean, describe this experience.
Well, so all the newbies, the selectees from next year's team, they will join the team in mid-September.
Okay.
So there's 6 weeks left of the season. Season generally ends mid-November with the end of season air show in Pensacola. So for the last 6 weeks of the season, the newbies join. Okay. And so there's probably, 8 or 10 of the new folks for next year. The 2 pilots, every other year there's a new boss. Maybe there's a flight surgeon or a maintenance officer or whatever. Those folks join the team, and their job for the last 6 weeks of the season is to just be a sponge and learn everything they can about the mindset, the culture, and the procedures of the team, and shadow the person they're going to replace, and just absorb everything you can. And that's it. Your job is to just learn and work out like a madman, and just focus on being ready so that when the end of season air show happens in mid-November, when that show finishes, there's dinner that night, and that's it. They hand off to the next year's team, and then off you go, and it's fights on for the next 2 years. So, so you're immersed in the culture as basically an observer, and you get to fly in the back seat a couple of times, 2, maybe 3 times, either with your counterpart or, with somebody on the team. I never flew with the boss when I was the mini boss, the selectee, but I did fly twice, once with the number 4 slot pilot and once with the lead solo pilot.
That 6 weeks must be really intimidating.
It is, because you have no idea what's going on or how it works. And these guys are operating, at the end of the season, they're flying tight, low, professional, nearly mistake-free demos and doing it every single day. And it's so overwhelming and intimidating, and you don't have a clue. And you're just trying to learn.
Drinking out of a fire hose.
Totally.
Yeah.
And like I say, you don't know what you don't know, and just trying to figure it out. And then the first time I flew was with Max McCoy. He's a battle group commander now as an admiral. But so we're doing the double farvel, and so boss in the 1 jet and 4 in the 4 jet are inverted, and 2 and 3 are right side up, and we're in a really tight diamond, and we're flying in from crowd right. We're coming right over the main gate at NAS Pensacola at 100 feet above ground level at 390 knots, inverted above boss. And Max is just chatting away about, hey, look, I went fishing with my son down there. You see the dock right there? And I'm like, Max, shut it. I do not care about your fishing with your son right now.
Focus.
Well, fly the airplane. But he's a second-year guy. He's been there, done that. And he's got this wired. And I remember a year later in Chicago, I'm flying the double farble, and I'm flying over Navy Pier at 100 feet, 390 knots. It's like, oh, there's Navy Pier. There's the deli right there. I had lunch with my son there yesterday. I was like, Russ, shut up. Fly the profile.
It's come full circle.
No time for crazy.
When was the first time you flew an F-18 Blue Angel?
In the front seat?
In the front seat, yes.
Yeah, well, so it was after the end of season air show.
Uh-huh.
We had a change of command on that Sunday, and now I was the boss, and so, we had a policy meeting on Monday where I kind of laid out my vision for the next 2 years, and we talked about all those things, and then, I flew my first flight, and it was just me and the number 2 pilot. The number 2 pilot is the right wingman, and so if you have a first-year boss, you have a second-year right wingman. And right wingman's job is to train the boss. But he's also training the boss in a job that he's never done.
Wow.
So the right wingman is just like, well, I don't know what to tell you, boss, but that ain't it. So it's a really interesting dynamic having somebody train you in a job he's never done. But he knows what right feels like. And so over time, you develop, a functional working relationship, and you figure it out. And so it was Todd Abrahamson, Jack, and God bless him, man. He had the unfortunate task of trying to train me to fly the demo. So, but yeah, it was just the two of us went out, and we just kind of worked through some of the most fundamental things, like straight and level flight, doing smoke drills, like smoke on, push, smoke off, push, and it was just getting the cadence right, even for turning on and off the smoke, things like that, making easy turns left and right. I mean, the most basic, fundamental, first day of flight school kind of things, but being able to do it, narrating first. So you have to say what you're going to do before you do it so that everybody can execute simultaneously. Mm-hmm. You never just fly the airplane. You always say it first and then do it. For example, if you're going to do a loop or something, you would say, up we go, right? Up we go, and on the G of go is when you start applying backstick. Okay. So they know that up we is preparatory, and G of go is when you start applying backstick pressure to start the loop. Those kind of things. Adding power on the P of power is when you're allowed to move the throttle, right? So everything is narrated first before executing so that we can all execute together simultaneously.
Okay. Wow. So I see, at this point, you fly the Blue Angel for the first time. You're obviously an experienced F-18 pilot at this point. Yeah. Well, I mean, what's it like to fly a Blue Angel F-18 versus, a fully loaded, combat-ready F-18?
Yeah, it's humbling and exciting at the same time. I've been flying airplanes, Hornets, for 18 years in the Navy. So, you've been around the block a few times, and you think you know how to fly the airplane. And that's true, but not like this. And not narrating everything before you do anything, and not doing the exact same thing with the stick and throttle every single time, based on your intonation, so they know exactly what to expect and how to respond. So that was the hard part. But flying the jet, it's slick. There's no pylons, no external fuel tanks, no nothing. So it is so fast and so responsive, and the acceleration is mind-blowing, and the G onset rate is mind-blowing and dangerous. And that's where people get themselves in trouble in a blue jet, is because you can put the stick in your lap and snap on 7.5, 8 Gs in an instant, and if you're not careful, you could knock yourself out, so you have to be mindful of that. Because in the fleet, you got 5 external pylons on the jet, you probably have external fuel tanks, and then if you're doing a strike or anything of substance, you've got bombs and missiles. And so the airplane is a pig, relatively, because it's all loaded up with draggy stuff on the outside. So you never fly a slick airplane in the fleet because you always have drop tanks because you're always at the ship,
Right.
So this is a totally different experience. Sports car.
It must be different. You're flying inverted too. I can't imagine, normally in the Navy, you're flying inverted for any great length of time.
Well, you can only fly inverted in the Hornet for 10 seconds, and then you flame out.
Okay.
Because there's no way to get fuel off the tops of the fuel tanks.
Okay.
The fuel pickups are in the bottom of the tanks.
Oh, okay.
So we had inverted fuel pumps in the Hornet, so you could fly upside down all day long in a Blue Hornet.
Okay.
So before we did double farble, for example, there was some little checklist, I can't remember, but the last step was pumps on. And that was inverted fuel pump on, so that when you rolled inverted, you're not going to starve the airplane of fuel, and it works just fine upside down.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So when does the Blue Angel practice season actually begin?
Well, so you'll start the Monday after end of season air show, so November, 15th, so thereabouts. You do local stuff in Pensacola for about a month. You take a day or two for Christmas, and then you start prepping to go out to El Centro. And we generally fly out to California January 2nd or so. And then for the next 10 weeks, it's winter training at El Centro, and we call it Jet Camp because you're flying 2 or 3 flights a day, 6 days a week for 10 weeks. And it's fun but brutal and exhausting. But it's just, I mentioned before, it's just repetition. It's over and over and over. And the winter training syllabus is about 120 flights. And we found over the years that that's about what it takes to get to the team to the point they can safely fly a conservative air show, with relatively big formations and relatively high-ish altitudes, but do it safely. And that's about what it takes. And so the first air show of the season is right there at El Centro, which you've been looking at now for 10 weeks.
Yeah.
So at least the unknown part of that is not a factor because you know the airfield and you know the area. The most stressful show of my Blue Angels tour was the first show after El Centro in my first season. And that was at Punta Gorda in Florida, it's over by Sarasota, I think. And anyway, my folks were there, my siblings were there and their families. And, we were in the hotel having breakfast on Saturday morning. It was like, I can't do this. I'm going to be sick here. I was so stressed. And, it was a new show site that I'd seen briefly on Friday. And it's the first time being somewhere away from El Centro doing an air show. And I was busy, trying to get everything in my head. So I left breakfast and I said, sorry, Mom, Dad, I'll see you on Sunday night. I can't. I went back to my hotel, got my satellite photo of the show site, and just flew the demo in my head in my hotel room over and over and over. And then my routine was I'd go out for a run, and if I could still remember all the checkpoints and all that, then I got this. And if I couldn't, oh my goodness, I'd come back and review what that one was that I couldn't remember and just try to get it into my head. So when I went out on Saturday afternoon, I had pre-flown the show in my head 10 or 20 times.
Mm-hmm. So is that how you would prep for a particular location? They give you satellite photos? Because obviously, you guys know the moves, you guys know the routines, and who's supposed to be where. But of course, the terrain and the location's different.
Right. That's right. So every week, Thursday, we call them Black Thursday, because Thursday morning you transit to a show site, you land, debrief the transit, and then brief what we call circle and arrival. And for circle and arrival, we'd go out basically in twos, and we'd go fly each of the 9 show maneuver run-in lines and call out what we see at 3 miles, 2 miles, a mile and a half, and a mile. Visually significant checkpoints like a barn or a McDonald's or a Best Buy or whatever it is, so that you had visual checkpoints to fly the demo. Because when you're maneuvering the old Legacy Hornets around aggressively in 3 dimensions, the INS, the inertial, would drift a little bit. And by the end of that half-hour flight, it might be off a 0.2 or 0.3 miles, which is not helpful when you're trying to find a precision center point, a school bus or a truck that's parked at center point. So we'd have to have visual checkpoints. We'd do that Thursday, and then we'd come back and debrief, circle, brief a full practice, and go out and fly a practice. So we fly 3 times on Thursday. It was a long day, but that would give you a chance to see, the airfield or in the area for the first time in a no audience, kind of low stress environment.
So that's enough practice then. So for like a show you'd have on like Saturday, is that right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. Saturday, Sunday's the show. Friday is a normal practice. Friday was a special day for the team because that's when we do a lot of community outreach and things like that. So, the pilots and the flight surgeon and all the officers will go out to schools or hospitals or fire station, various things like that, just to go get to talk to people in the community.
That must be really rewarding.
It was amazing. And one of those things you never knew was really part of the job, but was super satisfying. And then Friday was Friends and Family Day. And so it's a normal practice, same routine as would do on the weekends, but there's no real audience there other than our own friends and family and the local insiders. We used to do a lot of work with Make-A-Wish Foundation, and they'd come out on Fridays. And the beauty of that was after the show, we could come out and hang out with the Make-A-Wish kids, and not have to go to the crowd line or any of the stuff. and you could really give them some personal time, and that was pretty special.
Yeah, you guys must be signing a lot of autographs.
Yeah, you do a lot of it.
And it must
It's all
be,
good.
being a Blue Angel and being on the road, it's kind of like you're a musician in a way. I mean, you're away from your family. That must be hard to be away from the family for so long.
Yeah, I mean, it is. You're absolutely a road show. It's like you're Van Halen on tour or something like that, or a NASCAR team. It's very similar. It's the same thing. But it's also, I found it to be. I was fortunate because my kids were a little bit older because I was the boss and not a wingman. Now, so my two kids were 11 and 13-ish while I was there, so they were old enough to travel and appreciate, the show and the environment and the experience. So, anything within 8 or 10 hours by car, and my wife and the kids were there. And for all the big shows like Chicago, San Fran, Seattle, I'd fly them out, to be a part of that. So it was one of the best family tours I ever had, because you had something really special to share with people that you cared about, and that was just a time and an experience, and being on the inside and, sitting in Blue Angels seating, friends and family seating right at center point, things like that, pretty special and pretty awesome. So it was a great family tour. But yeah, you spend a lot of time on the road. And, when you go out west, you usually go for a 3 or 4 week trip because doesn't make sense to fly home on Sunday night from Seattle. So you'd line up your West Coast shows 3 or 4 weeks in a row, and do like San Diego, San Fran, Seattle, that kind of thing, Fargo, and do those all over a 4 week period, and then come home at the end.
Yeah, I imagine that must be part of the interview process or the prep work. Preparing the pilots for the stress they may incur on being away from friends and family for so long.
Yeah, and it was especially challenging, I think, for the wingmen because they're young junior officers, 30, 32, 34 years old in that range, and so a lot of them had little kids, not like travel ready kids like mine, and so that was a really tough dynamic for a lot of the folks because mom or dad would go on the road living like a rock star, staying in fancy hotels and hobnobbing and schmoozing with people all over the country, different city every weekend, and meanwhile someone's home with the baby, trying to figure out that whole thing, how that goes. So that was a tough dynamic for some of the younger folks, the younger families.
Yeah. So, in your opinion, what was the most difficult part of being a Blue Angel?
I think for me, especially as the boss, as I mentioned, I've been in the Navy for 18 years, been the commanding officer of a Hornet squadron, forward deployed on an aircraft carrier out of Japan, flown the Hornet combat and all that. And then here you come into a job that you have no idea how to do, and you've got a guy 15 years junior to you teaching you how to do it. And so it's a gut check, to be able to take the beating day after day, where you're really not good at this job. And there's so much to learn, and the expectations and the standards are so high, and you want to be good at it. So it was that was it. That was the hardest part, is to keep taking the beatings and taking the feedback, and finishing the debrief with, I'll fix my safeties, glad to be here, and put your game face on and go back to the hotel, work out, study, and do it all over again the next day, and be able to do that day in and day out. That was tough.
Is it unusual for somebody like yourself to be selected for the team and to be boss at the same time, or is the quote boss has he been a Blue Angel before prior?
No, nobody's been a Blue Angel before. There's only one guy who was ever a wingman, and then 10 years later came back to be the boss. But that's a totally different skill set. And that didn't work out. So generally, no boss has been a wingman before. Like I said, different skill set, different responsibilities, different selection process, all different. So, different job.
Being a Blue Angel and going through these maneuvers, you're going through them in your head. It's like day in, day out. You're living this life. when you're first starting to fly a Blue Angel, it's like having a new job. Are you dreaming about these maneuvers?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because you're trying to remember all the communications, all the power settings, all the angle of banks, all the parameters. So, it's just what worked for me was I scripted out the entire show in Word document. Everything that I'd say, every parameter that I was expected to set in the airplane, and I would go through that, and I would have it next to me in bed, and I'd wake up in a cold sweat. Oh, I can't remember the angle of bank for the Diamond 360. And I flip, it's 59 degrees. Okay, geez. And go back to sleep, close my eyes, and fly the Diamond 360 again, remembering that you set 59 degrees angle of bank. Those kind of things. It's insane. My right wingman, second year, Shorn, he woke up in the middle of the night, and he just happened to be lying on his stomach with his head facing left, and he's like, I'm looking the wrong way. And he thought he was going to have a midair, but he was in his hotel room. So, But, you're so immersed in it, and you're so stressed out trying to remember everything. You said it before, drinking from a fire hose. That is absolutely the case.
Wow.
So we all, in winter training, went through ridiculous things like that, after hours.
Because there's no margin for error whatsoever.
In winter training, like I said, the formations are huge. The separation is big enough to allow learning to happen and to make mistakes, so you're not going to run into each other. Right. So there's a lot of margin built in the beginning. And we've been doing this for a long time. So, the team is pretty good at, what can a new team safely accomplish in January, versus what can they do in October. So, there's margin built into all that stuff. But, there's still not much room for error.
So during the shows, how far, you guys are very, very close, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it depends on the maneuver. It depends on the conditions. If it's windy, bumpy, good visibility. And it depends on how the team is doing that day, know?
Okay.
So, when you're on it, you saw the new Blue Angels movie, the Blue Angels on Amazon Prime. And you saw, when they do Yankee set, there's a foot between the wingtips of number 2 and number 3 underneath Boss, and their heads are underneath the missile rail of Boss's jet. Mm-hmm. So there's massive overlap, there. And in some maneuvers, when the conditions are good and when the team is on and killing it. When it's bumpy, like in Chicago, when it's windy and violent, we share that show with the Thunderbirds. And only a second-year boss goes to that show because you're flying between the buildings with a 6-plane Delta formation. You have 600, 700 feet behind the crowd setting up for the next maneuver. And some of these buildings are up to 1,100 feet. Yeah. So you're literally flying between the buildings. And it's windy, and the water comes off, the wind comes off the water, it comes through the buildings like a Venturi. And it is violent and awful. And so, we have to make some specific accommodations, for how far apart we'd be and for all kinds of things to get through that and be able to safely execute the demo without running into each other, or something bad happening.
That's interesting. So those distances aren't necessarily set. There's a lot of flex there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the number 4 is the training officer, and he's the slot pilot. So he's underneath Boss in the Delta or the Diamond. And he is always a second-year pilot. And so as the training officer, he controls the formation because he flies a symmetrical position underneath Boss. So it's easy for him to keep track of number 2 and number 3, which would be at his right 2 o'clock and 10 o'clock or so. And then when we're in Delta, number 5 and number 6 are at his left 9 and his right 3 o'clock. So he can keep track of all those folks and basically control the formation, and call when to take it in or when to loosen up, all those kind of things based on the conditions and how everybody's doing and all that kind of stuff. So that's his or her job back there, is to manage the formation and keep everybody safe based on the conditions. But yes, there's definitely flex in how tight formations are depending on what's going on.
Did previous aircraft, for instance, like the F-4 Phantom and the A-4 Skyhawks, when they flew as Blue Angels, were they flying as close as the F-18s are today?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Different airplanes, different techniques and all that stuff, but they basically flew similar shows and similar formations. Absolutely.
Interesting. Now, how long,
Yep.
for those people who don't know, how long does one, quote, serve as a Blue Angel?
Generally 2 years.
Okay.
So an exception would be the narrator, number 7. He or she is a 3-year person because they serve as the narrator for a year, and then they join the Delta formation, and fly 2 more years in the Delta. But otherwise, it's generally a 2-year tour.
Okay. And that would be a difficult job, just being a narrator. I mean, you'd have to find a particular type of person that would be just right for that role.
Yeah, I mean, to call him, he is the narrator, he or she, but it's so much bigger than that because number 7 and number 8, the narrator and the events coordinator, go out and do winter site visits. So while we're at El Centro doing winter training, 7 and 8 are going to every single show site and meeting with the air show committee and going through the support manual and making sure everybody knows what to expect and how this is going to work when we drop in there later in the season. And then he comes out to El Centro for the last half of winter training and has to memorize the narration for the show because there's no note cards for the narrator. He's up there right in front of the crowd, right at center point with this microphone and doing the narration for all the maneuvers. And we have 5 different shows depending on what the weather is, and so he has to memorize all the maneuvers from all the different shows and the sequences and all that. So that's just that. And then during the season, the narrator leaves on Wednesday, goes to the show site, and makes sure everything is lying flat for the arrival of the team. So the support equipment is there, the hotel's ready, the air show committee's ready, everything. And then the team shows up on Thursday, Fat Albert first, and then the Jets. And then fights on for the weekend. And on Sunday night, the team flies out in the Jets. When all the Jets are gone, Fat Albert leaves, and then number 7 can leave last. And if any Hornet is broken, then he stays behind with the broken jet until it's fixed. Wow. And somebody jumps in his jet and leaves. So his day and his week never ends. And so it is a really, really hard job. And oh, by the way, on Wednesday, the narrator also does all the media rides. So he could do 3 media rides on Wednesday, putting a local weatherman in the back seat or a local celebrity or whatever it is to generate buzz and excitement in the town that the Blue Angels are here, that kind of thing. So the 7's job is just brutal and thankless. And if he does everything perfect, then everybody's like, all right, good show. Let's move on to the next one. But if things start coming unglued, it's like, what? What's going on? What have you been doing all day?
Yeah. Wow. That's fascinating. Wow. About the announcer. I had no idea.
It's tough.
So in 2004, you appeared in this 4-part miniseries documentary titled Blue Angels: A Year in the Life. At this point, of course, you're heading up the team. And how did this documentary come about? And was the documentary welcome because it was giving, free publicity to the Blue Angels? Or were there times you felt like the crew was kind of, in the way of your job?
Yeah, well, no, it was. It's funny you should ask because you've got to be cautious. And when the Discovery Channel crew arrived, we didn't know what their objective was. We didn't want it to be drama or like survival Pensacola or something. It had to be appropriate and in the best interest of the Navy to get the Navy support, of course. Mm-hmm. And we retained, edit authority. But anyway, it doesn't matter because one of the honoraries from the team had this concept and to do this documentary and just go behind the scenes and try to, talk a little bit, share a little bit about what it takes to make the machine work and follow the team for a year. And as it turned out, the Discovery Channel caught wind of it, got interested, and ended up, we want to do this, but we have our own producers. And so it's all or nothing. We buy it from you and we'll do it or forget about it. So, the opportunity to have the Discovery Channel do this was too good to pass up because they're pros. So we brought them on board. And for the first few weeks that they were on board, we didn't know who they were, what their objectives were. So we were cautious.
Right.
But then, there would be a time in a debrief when we had to, have a difficult moment, and I just go, Rich, camera off, please. And he'd turn the camera off, put it down, and we'd be like, "You son of a,"
Yeah.
All right, Rich, we're good. And so we started to trust them because we realized that they had the same goal as us, and that was to produce a high-quality product that was not only accurate but appropriate, and something we could all be proud of. And so one of the things that we changed for the Discovery Channel crew was we have a sunglasses policy that when you're talking to somebody who's not on the team, you take your sunglasses off because that's rude, and you make eye contact with them. And everybody needs to match boss's configuration. So if I take my sunglasses off, 15 other pair of sunglasses come off immediately, or else everybody gets fined $5 for being late matching my configuration. But anyway, we changed our sunglasses policy for the Discovery Channel crew because there's 3 of them that were with us for the whole year. And we said, hey, we consider you guys like teammates. So if you don't mind, we're going to be sunglasses on and casual with you, just like we are with our teammates. And we encourage you to do the same. And I mean, they were like in tears, that we would consider them teammates like that. So that was kind of a moment. But they did a fabulous job. The film is epic. It's 4 52-minute episodes. And it is the inside deal on how it works, how you rush the team, how the interview process goes, how the newbies time go. And everybody who's applied to the team since, I swear, 2004, has seen that video. Because every time I come to an end-of-season air show, the newbies know the 3 or 4 or 5 people who got most of the face time in that video. So it's a great training tool, too.
Yeah, it's a fabulous documentary. I've watched it several times now, and you must, because of such a wide distribution, you must be recognized from this documentary.
Yeah, I mean, here it's 20 years ago, right, when we did this thing. And I was in the Atlanta airport a week ago at the Admirals Club. A buddy of mine, that fellow Blue Angel also, an ex-boss, as a matter of fact, we're standing there with the gate agent, and he looks at me and he goes, "Are you Russ Bartlett?" And I was like, "I am. Why do you ask?" He goes, "Blue Angel boss, 2004?" And I was just like, "Yes, I was." And I looked at Boss Dom, my colleague, and I was like, "Dude, don't you have a miniseries? What's up? He's like, you don't even know who you are." And so it was hilarious. It was 20 years ago.
Yeah. That shows you the impression it made on people, though.
Yep. I mean, the exposure was huge. It was on the military channel. It was on the Discovery Channel, for years. And now you can't find it anymore because they pulled all the bootleg copies off of YouTube, and it's I don't know how you find it anymore.
Oh, yeah.
Which is sad. So.
Yeah, I urge anybody that can get a copy to get a copy of it because it's absolutely a fabulous documentary.
Yeah.
So kind of back to being a Blue Angel a little bit, people might have this perception of Navy pilots and perhaps specifically Blue Angel drivers as maybe having these massive egos. What was your experience in working with these group of pilots? Yeah,
well, first of all, if anybody who has a massive ego does not get hired for the team, period, dot. Your job, the demo is a tool, right? It's a way to share something special, something impressive, something fun, something, that's awesome. But your job is recruiting and public relations for the Navy and the Marine Corps, period, dot. That's your job. The demo allows you access to America. And so, people with attitudes, egos, they don't do good at this job because your job is to be humble and approachable and be able to go talk to a 12-year-old boy or, a 60-year-old grandmother, equally comfortably and share a nice moment, a micro engagement, just something special. So I find that to be absolutely not the case because that just doesn't work for this job.
Yeah, the old saying that there's old pilots and bold pilots, but no old bold pilots.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially with being a Blue Angel.
You say what you want, but I would tell you that there's not a more humble and thankful group of naval aviators on the planet than the folks that had the opportunity to fly the Blue Jet. I think life changer. You're forever thankful for it. You're forever thankful that the Navy had the confidence in you to give you that opportunity because it was really special and just absolutely spectacular.
And there must be that bond of folks that you were a Blue Angel with, plus that bond for all Navy drivers who are Blue Angels.
Yeah, for sure. The Alumni Association is really strong. Just one show that all of us will make an effort to get to. It's the end of the season, and that's always a big reunion. And every other year, it's also a change of command for the boss. So this year is going to be one of those years. And so, we all try to make end of season because that's the best chance to catch up and to just, share the camaraderie and the bond that's pretty unique and pretty special.
Yeah. So the interesting thing that I found that a lot of people may not know is that, typically as a Navy pilot, you wear a G suit. However, Blue Angels, they don't wear G suits. Can you tell us why this is?
Yeah. So back in the older days, before the Hornet, in the A4 and the F4, for example, the folks figured out that if you'd run the trim all the way nose down, you could rest your forearm on your thigh and use it like a fulcrum so that the stick is always pulling forward with about 40 pounds of force. And when that happens, you're always making minute pull corrections with your fist, right? Okay. It's not like pushing and pulling left and right, all that like you do in a neutral situation where there's no force on the stick whatsoever, which is the normal situation. But the Hornet has 2 flight control computers and 1 pilot, and all 3 of them get an equal vote. And so if you run the trim nose down in the Hornet and then fly in 1G flight, the Hornet goes, Russ, what are you doing? I got this. And it runs the trim back to center to 1G flight because it's smarter than you. Mm-hmm. The 2 flight control computers outvoted you. So the guys at the test pilot school figured out that if you just put a mechanical spring on the stick forward to the firewall, then the flight control computers won't know. So yes, there's 40 pounds of force pulling the stick forward the whole time during the demo. So if you let go of the stick or you have a G-induced loss of consciousness and you black out, guess what? Stick is going forward to the firewall, and you're going to fly into the ground in about a second. So it's very important that the pilots have good G tolerance and a good anti-G straining maneuver and know exactly what they're doing before they put a bunch of G on the airplane. I mentioned using your thigh as a fulcrum. That's the way we fly the airplane. Having a G suit on, inflating and deflating underneath your thigh or underneath your forearm on your thigh would cause absolutely unacceptable and unintended control inputs, and so we just can't have that. So we fly without a G suit, and what that means is every year, the team would have to go out to the centrifuge out at Naval Air Station Lemoore and go through anti-G training, every year to make sure you're up to speed on your anti-G straining maneuver and that you can handle the G forces in the jet. And that allowed us to have a waiver to fly without the G suit in the Hornet.
Wow.
So the combination of that, no G suit, and a slick airplane with no external pylons, no external fuel tanks, no bombs, no missiles, it is slick and clean, and it's so fast. And the G onset rate is so violent. You really got to know what you're dealing with, and get used to it gradually, because it's not like flying an airplane in the fleet that's all loaded up with stuff for combat. This thing is stripped down, shiny blue paint. It is fast and light.
Mm-hmm. And I understand you guys don't even do, because there's such an element of trust, you guys don't even pre-flight your airplanes. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's show business, So yeah. The crew chief pre-flights the jet in the morning. He gets the harness all set up, for the way the pilot likes it, so that it's ready for him to just strap in and go. So basically, we walk down to the airplane, we march out, get in the jet. Crew chief helps you strap in. Once he steps down, 4 minutes and 4 seconds later, you've got a fully aligned inertial navigation system and you're taxiing out. So, like I said, it's show business, and no one wants to see you walk around the jet for 20 minutes doing pre-flight before you get in.
Right, yeah. So just a few years after the documentary, this was actually on April the 21st in 2007, Lieutenant Commander Kevin Kojak Davis was killed in a Blue Angel show in Tennessee. Given how close
Beaufort, South Carolina.
Oh, it was South Carolina. Okay. No, thanks for correcting me. Given how close the Blue Angels family are, this must have hit you pretty hard, and the rest of the team.
Yeah, it's brutal, and I did the investigation on that one too. I had left the team 3 years earlier, and I was at my house in Burke, Virginia. I was working in the Pentagon, and I connected with an old Naval Academy buddy that I hadn't seen in years, and we were going to meet out in Delaware at a motocross track on Sunday. And I had my truck all loaded up with the 2 dirt bikes. I was going out with my son and all this stuff, and I got a call at like 3:15 on Saturday afternoon. It says, turn on CNN. And it was from the lead solo pilot when I was on the team. And I looked on there, and there it is. They're covering it. So I was like, holy cow. And so anyway, all that transpired. And the guy I was going to go riding with was a submarine driver. And he called me and he goes, hey, so, who does the investigation when something like that happens? And I was like, well, I don't know how they're handled that. But anyway, I'll see you tomorrow. We can talk about it at the track. And then at midnight, my phone rang, and it was my boss, the admiral I worked for in the Pentagon. And he goes, hey, the Blues called, and they want you to go do this investigation for the safety center. And so I was like, okay, when do you need me to leave? Or when do I need to be there? And he goes, well, you need to leave now. So I was like, damn. So we went out and took the dirt bikes out of the truck, and I left at 1 a.m. and drove straight through to Beaufort. And I met the other members of the investigation team down there. We spent the next 2 weeks, mapping the debris field and trying to figure out what happened and collecting all the evidence we could, packaged it up, sent it back to Pensacola, and we reassembled the airplane in a hangar for the analysis. And we worked with the test pilot school in the simulator to, interpret the black box and try to figure out exactly what happened. So it was administrative rendezvous behind the crowd, as they were in the Delta formation. 6 had low airspace. Boss was in a right turn behind the crowd as they were rejoining. 5 has high airspace above boss, and 6, put an aggressive turn on, and might have gotten some tunnel vision. Still flying the airplane, wasn't unconscious, but he picked up a rate of descent and hit the trees, at a fairly shallow angle. So it was a really, really unfortunate. Kojak was an all-star. And that really hit the team hard, because he was awesome, and his parents were there, and the whole thing was really awful. So, that was that. Another, the importance of G tolerance and G awareness, and all that stuff, really drives home that point.
Yeah, really tragic. When you were flying on the team, was there ever any close calls with anybody you were flying with?
There's always stuff, so, we started and finished my 2 seasons with the same amount of people and the same amount of airplanes that we started with, we finished with. So that's a pretty good thing.
Yeah.
You always have things in practice, where something's close or uncomfortable, whatever. You just knock it off. You analyze, you figure out what happened. Yeah, you put preventative measures in place, or you discuss it and make sure that we're aware of it and it can't happen again. So
put it behind
you. It's just the way it goes. It's been that way forever.
So after you're selected to be a Blue Angel, you fly a couple of years as a Blue Angel, then you're back to your squadron. Is that right?
Yeah, in my case, as the boss, you're pretty senior, and your choice after that is generally to pursue the aircraft carrier captain pipeline, which is about an 8-year journey, or to pursue the air wing commander or CAG pipeline. So I ended up going to the Pentagon to do this thing called the Quadrennial Defense Review with Admiral Pat Walsh, who was a Blue Angel 87, 88. He was then a 2-star, and he recruited me to come up and do the Quadrennial Defense Review with him. So here I am in the middle of November, flying the Blue Jet, rock star, living the dream. A week later, I was in the basement of the Pentagon making slides for admirals. And there you go. There's the circle of life in the Navy right there.
So is it, if you're in the Navy, is there a hierarchy, if you will, where, there are other Navy drivers they'll come up to you and be like, and find out you're a Blue Angel and go, whoa, you were a Blue Angel, like what an incredible experience,
Yeah, I guess so, but, it's funny for non-Blue Angel people to make fun of Blue Angels and go, oh, yeah, you guys go do loops to music, whatever, So, yeah, there's a lot of that. It's all in good fun because everybody knows what the goodness that the team does for the Navy. That's the best recruiting tool. It's the most visible outreach tool in the Navy's arsenal. And it's awesome. So we got to preserve that and make sure we don't screw up and we fly good, safe demos. And in this environment right now, if us or Thunderbirds, have something go horribly wrong, it's over. So guys got to be super careful.
No, it is a great recruiting tool. I mean, of course, and I was raised in the 80s, so I was raised with the Van Halen video Dreams, when they used to fly Blue Angels A4 Skyhawks, and, still one of my favorite videos to this day. I love it.
It's amazing. Yeah. And talk about groundbreaking. Think of that, back in the early 80s doing a music video with the Blue Angels flying in the Skyhawk. Yeah. That was pretty groundbreaking time.
Yeah. When did you officially finish your Navy career?
So January of 2008, I requested after that Quadrennial Defense Review thing to go to the Navy International Programs Office, also in D.C. They do all the foreign military sales for the Department of the Navy. So if, a regional combatant commander, like the commander of the U.S. Pacific Command, wants some country in his region, for example, say he wants India to have a ship or some helicopters or whatever, he puts that request in, through the Secretary of the Navy to the Navy International Programs Office, and we were the organization that would make that happen. So it was kind of like the business side of the Navy, not for buying airplanes for the Navy's use, but for putting equipment in the hands of our partners and allies. So it was absolutely fascinating, and that's when I decided to take the plunge and get out of the Navy and go to the aerospace and defense industry. My second kid was a senior in high school. I was in that job. I was working closely with all the usual suspects in the industry. So it was a perfect opportunity for me to transition into an industry where I knew people and had some idea how it worked. So just perfect timing for us.
So tell us what you're doing these days.
Well, so I spent about 15 years in the industry. I went out to Beechcraft, and I was a sales and marketing guy for 4 years, selling the T-6 Texan military trainer aircraft. Then I was the president of that company, building the airplanes and running the production line and all that stuff. Then we were bought by Textron in 2014 and became part of Textron Aviation. And in 2016, we bought an adversary air services company. So this was a small company that worked with the Navy and bought ex-foreign fighter jets and put ex-U.S. military fighter pilots in them and provided professional bad guys to the Navy for training so that the Navy didn't have to generate those sorties themselves. Yeah. So fabulous opportunity. Spent 4 years doing that. Then went to Command Aerospace for a couple of years as COO. And I got out of the industry about a year ago. And now I'm doing a little bit of consulting, but mostly I'm on the speaker circuit, and I'm leveraging a little bit of Blue Angels behind the scenes and talking about the essential components of high-performance teams and achieving excellence in all you do, those kinds of things, and really having a ball. My target audiences are young professionals, aspiring leaders, and seasoned executives. So kind of 3 different pipelines and messages tailored for each. But that's what I'm doing. I'm working on a book, creating content for my website, and I'm out there on the road trying to make a living doing this and loving it.
That's great. So when could we expect to see a book from you?
Probably about a year.
A year, okay.
A couple of my coaches from a company called the Speaker Lab that I did a master's program with said, don't be in too much of a rush to write your first book because it's going to take you a year or two really to find your voice, find your messages, find the audiences that you enjoy working with most and that you resonate with most, and then target it on that. So my priority for the next 2 months is to get my website up and running. It'll be centerpointleadership.com, centerpoint-leadership.com. Centerpoint is the center of the air show. It's the truck or school bus parked at Centerpoint that we use to find Centerpoint, and that's where all the maneuvers are centered. So it's the center of the air show, it's the center of life, and it's the foundation for my leadership company and my keynote addresses. So centerpoint-leadership.com, coming soon.
Well, that's great. We'll definitely be sure to visit that and urge all of our visitors to do so. And Captain, I want to thank you for joining us today and giving us this, behind the scenes, albeit small glimpse into the Blue Angels. So I really appreciate you joining us, and thank you so much.
My pleasure, Christian. It was a joy talking to you guys, and I hope your folks enjoy it.